Isabella Martinez stepped through the golden gates of the Whitman estate, her heart pounding. Mrs. Victoria Whitman's icy stare cut through her. "You're the new housekeeper. I expect perfection, nothing less." Alexander barely glanced up from his newspaper. "Just remember your place here. You're nothing more than the help." That night, Isabella clutched her mother's photograph, whispering a prayer for strength. She worked from dawn to dusk, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, never complaining despite their cold treatment. They spoke about her as if she were invisible, discussing business deals while she served their coffee. When her mother's photograph slipped from her pocket, Isabella's hands trembled as she retrieved it. The image showed her mother Maria in a hospital bed, diabetes slowly stealing her strength. Every night after work, Isabella attended nursing school, determined to build a better future. "Don't think studying will make you anything more than what you are," Victoria sneered. "People like you belong in service." Isabella knelt in prayer, asking God for strength to endure the humiliation and keep her faith strong. What Isabella didn't know was that Alexander had begun watching her from his bedroom window. She poured her heart into every task, transforming simple ingredients into beautiful meals. "Don't worry, Mama," she whispered in Spanish during her weekly call. "I'll send the money for your medication soon." Her knees ached from scrubbing marble stairs, but Isabella refused to show weakness. In the reflection of Victoria's golden mirror, Isabella saw not a servant, but a woman with dreams. While the Whitmans slept in luxury above, Isabella studied by lamplight, memorizing medical terms. At 4 a.m., she was already preparing their breakfast, her movements graceful despite exhaustion. "She's different from the others," Alexander said to his mother. "There's something special about her." But what Isabella didn't know was that this humble empregada was about to teach the most arrogant heir in Beverly Hills the true meaning of love. Before we continue Isabella's incredible journey, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more amazing stories. What you need to understand about Isabella is that she approached every task with a reverence that was almost sacred. Every morning at 6 sharp, she would begin her work in the grand foyer, treating each priceless antique like a treasure from a museum. You could see the love in her gentle touch as she polished every surface to perfection, whispering small prayers of gratitude under her breath. "Thank you, God, for this opportunity," she would murmur in Spanish as she worked. While other housekeepers might rush through their duties, Isabella found dignity in her work, transforming routine cleaning into acts of devotion that somehow made the entire mansion feel warmer and more alive. Now here's what Isabella didn't notice. Alexander had started stealing glances at her while she worked, something he had never done with previous household staff. There was something different about this woman, a gracefulness in her movements that intrigued him despite all his efforts to maintain that cold, superior attitude he'd been raised with since childhood. He would try to focus on his business reports, telling himself to concentrate on the quarterly earnings, but his eyes kept drifting to her peaceful presence. What is it about her? He found himself wondering, disturbed by thoughts he couldn't understand or control. During lunch service, you would witness Victoria's cruelty in full display. She would criticize every tiny detail of Isabella's work with venom in her voice. "This soup is too warm," she would snap. "The silverware isn't aligned properly. Do I need to teach you how to set a table?" Her words were designed to humiliate, to remind Isabella of her place. But here's what was remarkable. Isabella would respond to each harsh criticism with patience and grace. "Yes, Mrs. Whitman, I'll fix that right away," she would say calmly, never allowing bitterness to take root in her heart. The strength she drew from her faith and her mother's teachings back in Mexico was unshakable. But it was in the kitchen where you could see Isabella's true nature emerge like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Away from the critical eyes of the Whitmans, she would hum those traditional Mexican melodies her grandmother had taught her, her voice filling the empty space with warmth and life. "Ay, mi nieta," she could almost hear her grandmother saying, "cook with love and the food will heal hearts." As she seasoned each dish with care, Isabella would smile, remembering family gatherings where food was prepared with laughter and shared stories. Even in service to those who looked down on her, she found ways to create beauty and nourishment, turning simple ingredients into masterpieces. What Alexander witnessed from the library window would change something deep inside him. There was Isabella, tenderly caring for his mother's prized roses, speaking to them softly in Spanish as if they were old friends. "Grow strong, my beauties," she would whisper. "Show them your colors." Her natural connection with all living things revealed a nurturing spirit he had never encountered in his privileged world of cold transactions and superficial relationships. As he watched her gentle hands work the soil, Alexander began to question what he had been missing in his empty existence, surrounded by wealth, but devoid of genuine human warmth and connection. Every evening, you would find Isabella in her tiny room, meticulously counting her hard-earned wages like an accountant handling millions. She would carefully divide every single dollar between her mother's mounting medical expenses, nursing school tuition, and the bare minimum needed for basic necessities. Her sacrifice was absolute. She kept nothing for herself beyond what was essential to survive in expensive Beverly Hills. "Hold on, Mama," she would whisper while sealing another envelope with money. "I'm coming home to take care of you soon." Every penny she sent home was a testament to her love, a bridge built from her own sacrifice that connected her mother's hospital bed to her dreams of a better future. Then came that moment that would haunt Alexander's thoughts for days. Their eyes met briefly in the hallway, and for just an instant he saw past her humble position to the remarkable woman beneath. Isabella quickly looked away, but not before he noticed the intelligence and depth that sparkled in her warm brown eyes, challenging everything he thought he knew about social status and worth. "Excuse me, Mr. Whitman," she said softly, stepping aside. But in that fleeting moment, something had shifted in the carefully constructed walls around his heart, though he couldn't yet understand what it meant. At nursing school, you could see Isabella's determination burning like a flame that refused to be extinguished. She absorbed every lesson with intense focus, understanding that education was her pathway to freedom and her mother's salvation. Her notebook filled with careful diagrams and detailed notes, each page representing hours of study after exhausting days of manual labor. "The human heart has 4 chambers," she would repeat to herself, determined to master every detail. Her professors recognized her exceptional dedication and natural compassion, seeing in her the qualities that made not just good nurses, but exceptional healers who understood that medicine was about caring for souls as much as treating bodies. Alone in the evening silence, Alexander found himself thinking about Isabella in ways that both confused and deeply troubled him. He had been surrounded by wealthy, educated women his entire life, debutantes, heiresses, socialites who spoke multiple languages and attended the finest schools. Yet none had captured his attention like this humble housekeeper who carried herself with quiet dignity. "What's wrong with me?" he would mutter, taking another sip of whiskey. He couldn't shake the image of her gentle smile or the way she treated everything and everyone with such genuine care and respect. Each morning before sunrise, you would see Isabella walking up that long path to the mansion, her steps filled with purpose and unwavering determination. She had made a sacred promise to her mother that she would build a better life, and each day brought her one step closer to that dream, even if the path seemed impossibly steep. "Today will be better," she would tell herself as she approached the golden gates. God has a plan. What she didn't know was that her quiet strength and unshakable faith were about to transform the coldest heart in Beverly Hills in ways she never could have imagined. What you're about to witness would mark the beginning of everything changing between them. Alexander had never ventured into the kitchen before. That was staff territory. But this particular morning, he found himself drawn there by the most incredible aromas wafting through the mansion. When he pushed open the door, there was Isabella, moving gracefully between stove and counter, completely absorbed in her work. "Oh, Mr. Whitman," she gasped, nearly dropping the pan she was holding. "I'm sorry, I didn't expect. Is everything all right?" For the first time, Alexander found himself at a loss for words. suddenly aware that he had no real reason for being there except his growing curiosity about this remarkable woman. During breakfast, Victoria's sharp eyes noticed the subtle change in Alexander's demeanor around Isabella, and it immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. She watched like a hawk as her son's gaze lingered just a moment too long when Isabella refilled his coffee cup. "Alexander," Victoria said with ice in her voice, "I need to speak with you about the Henderson's charity gala. There are several eligible young ladies I want you to meet." Her message was clear. He needed to focus on women of their social standing. But Alexander barely heard her words. His attention was completely captured by the gentle way Isabella moved around the room, treating each task with care and dignity. Here's where Alexander started creating excuses to be wherever Isabella was working. He would suddenly need a book from the library while she was dusting, or require something from the conservatory during her cleaning schedule there. "Excuse me," he would say, reaching for a book just as she was working on that same shelf. These weren't coincidences. They were carefully orchestrated moments where he could observe her more closely. Isabella, always respectful, would step aside and say, "Of course, Mr. Whitman. Please, take your time." But what she didn't realize was that he wasn't there for the books at all. He was there to understand what made her so different from everyone else in his world. In the conservatory, something beautiful happened that would change everything. Alexander found Isabella carefully tending to the plants, speaking to them softly in Spanish as she watered each one. "You love plants," he observed, his voice gentler than Isabella had ever heard it. She looked up, surprised by his presence and his tone. "Yes, sir. My grandmother taught me that plants respond to love, just like people do." There was no pretense in her voice, no attempt to impress him. Just honest, simple truth. For the first time in his privileged life, Alexander was having a real conversation with someone who spoke from the heart rather than calculated social advantage. That evening, Alexander found himself walking in the garden just as Isabella was finishing her outdoor tasks. "Isabella," he called out, surprising himself with his boldness. She turned, clearly uncertain about this unprecedented interaction. "Yes, Mr. Whitman. I wanted to thank you," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking her for. "The house, it feels different since you've been here. Warmer, somehow." Isabella's eyes widened with surprise. "That's very kind of you to say, sir." For a moment, they stood there in the fading light, both sensing that something significant was shifting between them, though neither could have named exactly what it was. This is when Alexander would discover the depth of Isabella's determination and dreams. Unable to sleep, he wandered toward the kitchen for water and found her there, surrounded by nursing textbooks and medical supplies, completely absorbed in her studies despite being exhausted from a full day of work. "Isabella," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, embarrassed to be caught studying in the family space. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitman. I can go to my room." "No," he said quickly. "Don't stop because of me. What are you studying?" This was the moment when he would truly see her as a person with dreams and aspirations far beyond her current circumstances. What happened next would forever change how Alexander saw Isabella, and, perhaps more importantly, how he saw himself. "I'm studying to become a nurse," she explained, her voice filled with passion and purpose. "I want to help people who can't afford proper medical care, like my mother back in Mexico." Alexander found himself genuinely interested, asking questions he'd never thought to ask anyone before. "Tell me about your mother," he said gently. As Isabella shared her story, her mother's diabetes, the struggle to pay for medication, her own sacrifice to build a better future, Alexander realized he was hearing about a kind of love and dedication he'd never experienced in his world of privilege and ease. "My mother always told me that God gives us challenges not to break us, but to show us how strong we can be," Isabella shared, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she spoke about her deepest motivations. "Every day I clean these floors, I remember that it's not forever. Every dollar I save brings me closer to the day when I can help people like my mother get the care they deserve." Alexander sat in stunned silence, realizing that while he had spent his entire life complaining about the burden of wealth and responsibility, This woman had turned her struggles into stepping stones toward a purpose that had nothing to do with personal gain and everything to do with serving others. Then came the moment that would reveal Alexander's true character beneath all his privilege and arrogance. As Isabella gathered her books, tired from their long conversation, her elbow accidentally caught the edge of one of Victoria's precious Chinese vases sitting on the counter. Time seemed to slow as the priceless antique tumbled toward the marble floor. But Alexander's hand shot out, catching it just inches from disaster. "Thank you," Isabella whispered, her face pale with the realization of what almost happened. "My mother would have. This probably costs more than I make in a year." "It's just a thing, Isabella," Alexander said quietly, setting the vase safely aside. "It's not worth more than your peace of mind." As their unexpected midnight conversation drew to an end, both Alexander and Isabella knew that something profound had shifted between them. "You should get some rest," Alexander said softly, though he was reluctant to end this first real conversation he'd had in years. "Thank you for listening, Mr. Whitman. Most people don't want to hear about dreams that seem too big for someone like me." "Alexander," he corrected gently, "and your dreams aren't too big, Isabella. If anything, I'm beginning to think they're exactly the right size." As she gathered her books and headed toward her quarters, Alexander remained in the kitchen, staring at the space where she'd been sitting, knowing that his carefully ordered world had just been turned completely upside down by a woman who saw potential where others saw only obstacles. What you need to understand is that Isabella had been pushing herself far beyond human limits for weeks, working from dawn to dusk at the mansion, then attending nursing school until midnight. She was surviving on nothing but determination and prayer. This particular morning, you could see the exhaustion written across her pale face as she prepared breakfast with trembling hands. She kept pausing to steady herself against the marble countertop, whispering, "Just get through today, Isabella. Mama needs this job." But her body was about to betray her iron will, and she had no idea how dramatically her life was about to change. As Isabella moved through her cleaning routine, each task became a monumental effort. You could see her gripping the banister tightly as she dusted the grand staircase, her legs unsteady beneath her. She'd been skipping meals to save every penny for her mother's medication, and the combination of overwork and malnutrition was finally taking its toll. "I can do this," she told herself. But her reflection in the polished marble showed a young woman whose body was failing her spirit. She didn't notice Alexander watching from his study doorway, growing concern evident in his eyes as he observed her obvious distress and weakness. Then it happened, the moment that would shatter the barriers between them forever. Isabella was carrying a tray of crystal glasses when the world suddenly began spinning violently around her. "Dios mío," she gasped, feeling her knees buckle completely. The tray crashed to the marble floor as she collapsed, crystals shattering like fallen stars around her unconscious form. Alexander heard the crash from his study and came running faster than he'd ever moved in his life. Where he found Isabella motionless on the floor, surrounded by broken glass. Something fundamental shifted deep inside his chest. "Isabella!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her, terrified and completely helpless. Alexander's protective instincts exploded like nothing he'd ever experienced before in his sheltered life. "Someone call Dr. Harrison immediately," he barked at the staff members who had gathered around the scene. He carefully lifted Isabella in his arms, shocked by how fragile and light she felt, how this strong woman had become so breakable. As he carried her toward the guest bedroom, he could feel her shallow, irregular breathing against his chest, and for the first time in his privileged existence, Alexander understood what it meant to be truly, desperately afraid for another person's well-being and survival. Dr. James Harrison had been treating the Whitman family for over 15 years, but he'd never seen Alexander this agitated about anyone's health before. As he carefully examined Isabella's unconscious form, checking her pulse and vital signs, Alexander paced the room like a caged tiger. "What's wrong with her, James?" Alexander demanded, his voice tight with worry. "When will she wake up? Is she going to be all right?" Dr. Harrison looked up with professional concern. "She's severely malnourished and completely exhausted, Alexander. Her body simply shut down from overwork and lack of proper nutrition. This young woman has been running on empty for far too long." What happened next would have shocked everyone who knew the arrogant, self-centered Alexander Whitman. He refused to let any other staff member care for Isabella, insisting on tending to her recovery himself. When she finally stirred awake several hours later, the first thing Isabella saw was Alexander sitting beside her bed, holding a bowl of warm soup in his hands. "Mr. Whitman?" she whispered, confusion and embarrassment evident in her weak voice. "What happened? I should be working. Mrs. Whitman will be so angry with me." "You collapsed from exhaustion," he said with a gentleness that surprised them both. "And you're not moving from this bed until Dr. Harrison says you're completely recovered." Isabella's first instinct was to return to her duties immediately, despite her weakened condition. "I can't stay in this beautiful room, Mr. Whitman. This is for family and important guests. I have cleaning to finish, dinner to prepare." She tried to sit up, but Alexander placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "You're staying here until you're completely well, and that's final," he said with an authority that brooked no argument. Isabella stared at him with wide, confused eyes. "I don't understand why you're being so kind to me. I'm nobody special, just a housekeeper." Her innocent words pierced through every defense Alexander had ever built around his heart. "You are so much more than that, Isabella," Alexander heard himself saying, words flowing from a part of his heart he'd never known existed. As she looked at him with those trusting brown eyes, he began to understand that this humble, hard-working woman had somehow become the most important person in his carefully ordered world. "I've been watching you work every day with such dedication and grace. You bring something to this house that was missing before: warmth, life, something real." Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined that Alexander Whitman even noticed her as a human being, let alone valued her presence in his privileged world. For the first time in his life, Alexander found himself genuinely interested in someone else's story and struggles. "Tell me about your dreams, Isabella. What do you hope for beyond nursing school?" She hesitated and used to anyone of his social status, showing real interest in her personal life. "I grew up poor in a small village outside Guadalajara," she began softly. "My father died when I was 12, so my mother raised me alone while battling diabetes. She taught me that no matter how difficult life becomes, we must never lose faith that God has a plan for us." As Isabella spoke about her childhood poverty, her struggles, and her unwavering determination to build a better future for her family, Alexander realized he was learning more about true strength and character than he'd learned in 32 years of privilege. Then Alexander did something he'd never done before. He opened up about his own inner emptiness and isolation. "You talk about your mother's strength and your faith with such certainty. I've had every advantage money can buy, but I feel empty inside, lonely, even surrounded by people." Isabella's heart went out to this man who seemed to have everything but felt he had nothing meaningful. "Money and status can't fill the emptiness in our hearts, Mr. Whitman," she said gently. "Only love and purpose can do that. Perhaps God brought you into my life, and me into yours, for a reason we don't understand yet." As their eyes met in that quiet room, both Alexander and Isabella felt something profound shifting between them, a connection that transcended every social barrier that should have kept them apart. What you're about to witness is the moment when everything they've been fighting finally came to the surface. Over the weeks following Isabella's recovery, Alexander and Isabella had begun stealing precious moments together whenever they could escape prying eyes. In the secluded corner of the garden, surrounded by his mother's prize-winning roses, Alexander took Isabella's hand in his for the first time. "I never believed in fate until I met you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella's heart raced as she looked into his blue eyes, seeing a vulnerability she'd never imagined possible. "We have to be careful, Alexander," she whispered back, glancing nervously toward the house. "If anyone sees us, But in that moment, surrounded by the fragrance of roses, their love felt stronger than any obstacle the world could place before them. Their secret meetings became the highlight of both their days, moments of genuine connection stolen from a world that insisted they were from different universes. In the library after hours, Alexander would read to Isabella from books of poetry, his voice soft and tender as he shared verses about love that transcended social barriers. "We have to hide like criminals just to spend time together," Alexander said with frustration one evening. Isabella placed her finger gently on his lips. "Someone might hear us," she cautioned, but her eyes shone with the same love that burned in his heart. These stolen hours felt like living in a beautiful, dangerous secret that could destroy them both if discovered. One evening, Isabella made the bold decision to share a piece of her heritage with Alexander by teaching him to cook her grandmother's tamales recipe during the staff's time off. "We have to be quiet," she whispered, showing him how to spread the masa. "If Mrs. Whitman finds us together like this." Alexander's clumsy attempts to wrap the corn husks made her giggle softly, and for a moment they forgot about the dangerous game they were playing. "I want the whole world to know I love you," he whispered, but Isabella quickly shushed him. "The walls have ears in this house. Mi amor," she warned, though her heart soared at his words. As their secret love deepened, Isabella's practical nature couldn't ignore the impossible reality of their situation. "Alexander, what future can we possibly have?" she asked during one of their clandestine meetings in the conservatory. "I'm a poor Mexican housekeeper, and you're heir to a fortune. Your mother will disown you. Society will destroy us both." Alexander's response was a passionate declaration that surprised them both. "Then let's leave all this behind, Isabella. I want to introduce you to the world as my girlfriend, as the woman I love. We'll make our own life together, away from all these cruel expectations and social barriers." But even as Alexander spoke of a future together, Isabella wrestled with fears that kept her awake at night. Alone in her tiny room, holding the photograph of her sick mother, she struggled with impossible choices. "What should I do, Mama?" she whispered to the image. "He wants to present me as his novia, but what will happen to my nursing school dreams? What will happen to your medical bills if I lose this job?" Every rational part of her mind screamed that loving Alexander was dangerous, but her heart refused to listen to the warnings that echoed in her head. Their first kiss happened under a canopy of stars in the garden where Isabella had first tended the roses that brought them together. Alexander cupped her face gently in his hands, looking into her eyes as if asking permission for something sacred. When their lips finally met, it was with a tenderness that spoke of reverence rather than passion, a kiss that sealed a love they both knew was forbidden. "I don't care what anyone thinks," Alexander whispered against her lips. "I love you, Isabella Martinez, and I want the world to know it." But even as she melted into his embrace, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that their happiness was too fragile to survive in the harsh light of reality. What Alexander and Isabella didn't realize was that Victoria's sharp maternal instincts had been picking up on every subtle change in her son's behavior for weeks. During family dinners, she watched Alexander's face transform when Isabella entered the room to serve their meals. His cold arrogance had been replaced by a warmth that made Victoria's blood run cold with recognition and fury. "You seem distracted lately, Alexander," she commented with deceptive casualness. "Perhaps we should discuss your social calendar. There are several important families I want you to reconnect with." Her words carried an underlying threat that Alexander, drunk on love, completely failed to recognize. Victoria's response to her growing suspicions was swift and ruthless. She contacted the most discreet private investigator in Beverly Hills, a man who specialized in protecting wealthy families from potential scandals. "I need you to investigate one of our household staff members," she told him coldly, sliding a photograph of Isabella across the mahogany desk. "Her name is Isabella Martinez. I want to know everything about her background, her family, her financial situation, and most importantly, any inappropriate interactions she may be having with my son." The investigator nodded professionally. "How deep do you want me to dig, Mrs. Whitman?" As deep as necessary to protect my family's reputation, Victoria replied with ice in her voice. At nursing school, Isabella's friend Carmen noticed the dreamy, distracted way Isabella had been behaving in their classes. During a break between lectures, Carmen pulled her aside with genuine concern written across her face. "Isabella, Mija, I need to talk to you about something serious," Carmen said, her voice heavy with worry. "You've been different lately. Happier, but also more nervous. And I've heard some of the other students talking about how you've been arriving to class with expensive items." Isabella's heart began to race as she realized her secret might not be as well hidden as she'd hoped. Carmen continued, "I've seen what happens when girls like us get involved with rich employers. It never ends well, Hermana. Never." While Alexander and Isabella continued to believe their love was a beautiful secret shared only between them, the walls were closing in around their fragile happiness. Victoria sat in her private study, reviewing the preliminary report the investigator had delivered. The photographs of Alexander and Isabella's secret garden meetings, the documentation of their late-night encounters, the detailed background information about Isabella's family situation, it was all the ammunition Victoria needed to destroy their relationship completely. As she studied the evidence that would soon tear apart her son's heart, Victoria felt no remorse, only the cold satisfaction of a mother protecting her family's legacy from what she saw as a dangerous threat. The fairy tale was about to become a nightmare, and neither Alexander nor Isabella had any idea how brutal the awakening would be. The moment Victoria had been waiting for finally arrived with the investigator's complete report. Spread across her mahogany desk were dozens of photographs documenting Alexander and Isabella's secret romance, stolen kisses in the garden, intimate conversations in the library, tender moments they thought no one could see. "Perfect," Victoria whispered with cold satisfaction as she studied each piece of evidence. The report contained everything she needed: Isabella's financial desperation, her mother's medical bills, her ambitious dreams that could be so easily crushed. Victoria had spent her entire life protecting the Whitman legacy, and she wasn't about to let some gold-digging housemaid destroy everything she'd built. The time had come to end this ridiculous fairy tale once and for all. Isabella was peacefully dusting the antiques in the foyer, humming softly to herself and thinking about her evening plans to meet Alexander in the garden, when Victoria's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Isabella Martinez," Victoria called out, her tone so sharp and commanding that Isabella immediately stopped what she was doing. "I need to speak with you in the living room. Now." The way Victoria pronounced her full name sent a chill down Isabella's spine. She'd never heard such coldness, such barely controlled fury in Victoria's voice before. "Yes, Mrs. Whitman," Isabella replied respectfully, but her hands began to tremble as she set down her cleaning supplies. Something was very, very wrong, and she could feel it in every fiber of her being. Victoria led Isabella into the formal living room, her movements sharp and predatory, like a hunter who had finally cornered her prey. "Sit down," Victoria commanded, but she remained standing, towering over Isabella with an intimidating presence that filled the room with tension. Isabella perched nervously on the edge of an expensive chair, her heart racing as she tried to understand what she could have done wrong. "Mrs. Whitman, if I made a mistake with my work, I can fix it," Isabella began, but Victoria cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, my dear girl," Victoria said with false sweetness that made Isabella's blood run cold. "Your work performance is the least of my concerns right now." Then Victoria began placing the photographs on the coffee table, one by one, like a prosecutor presenting evidence in a murder trial. Isabella watched in growing horror as images of her most intimate moments with Alexander appeared before her eyes. Their first kiss in the garden, their late-night conversations in the library, moments she thought were private and sacred. "Surprised?" Victoria asked with venomous satisfaction. "Did you really think you could seduce my son without me finding out? Did you honestly believe I would let some desperate little gold digger destroy my family?" Isabella's hands flew to her mouth as tears began streaming down her face. The violation she felt was overwhelming, Their beautiful, private love had been turned into something ugly and sordid through Victoria's invasive surveillance. Victoria's words became increasingly vicious as she saw Isabella's emotional breakdown and pressed her advantage like a predator sensing weakness. "You think you're so special, don't you? You think your little sob story about your sick mother makes you different from all the other scheming women who've tried to trap wealthy men." Victoria's voice dripped with contempt and hatred. "Let me tell you what you really are, Isabella Martinez. You're a calculating little opportunist who saw a lonely, naive young man and decided to use your feminine wiles to secure a better life for yourself. You're nothing but a common gold digger with a pretty face and a manufactured sad story designed to manipulate sympathy from gullible men like my son." Through her tears, Isabella tried desperately to defend herself and the genuine love she shared with Alexander. "Mrs. Whitman, please, you have to believe me. I never wanted this to happen. I tried to keep my distance, but we fell in love. I love Alexander for who he is as a person, not for his money. I work hard. I pay my own way. I've never asked him for anything material." But Victoria laughed coldly at Isabella's heartfelt protests. "Love? You call this pathetic scheme love? My dear girl, love doesn't pay for your mother's medical bills, does it? Love doesn't put you through nursing school or lift you out of the poverty you were born into. But marrying a Whitman certainly would solve all those problems, wouldn't it?" Victoria's words twisted Isabella's genuine feelings into something mercenary and calculating. Then came the moment that would shatter Isabella's world completely and forever. Victoria sat down across from her, leaning forward with the intensity of a cobra preparing to deliver a fatal strike. "Here's what's going to happen, Isabella. You're going to pack your things and leave this house immediately. You will never contact my son again. You will disappear from his life as completely as if you never existed." Isabella opened her mouth to protest, but Victoria wasn't finished with her devastating ultimatum. "If you refuse, I will personally ensure that you never work in the city again. I will have you deported back to Mexico, and I will make absolutely certain that your mother never receives another penny for her medical care. I have the power to destroy not just you, but everyone you care about." Victoria's final act of cruelty was to make Isabella's dismissal as public and humiliating as possible. She called all the household staff to the foyer, then announced Isabella's immediate termination in front of everyone who had worked alongside her. "Isabella Martinez is no longer employed by this household," Victoria declared with cold, commanding authority. "She has been dismissed for inappropriate conduct and serious breach of professional boundaries. Security will escort her from the premises immediately." The other staff members looked on in shock and whispered among themselves as Isabella stood there with tears streaming down her face, her dignity stripped away in front of people who had been her colleagues and friends. The woman who had always treated everyone with respect and kindness was now being publicly shamed and cast out. That's when Alexander walked through the front door, returning from a business meeting to find the woman he loved standing in the center of a public humiliation orchestrated by his own mother. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes immediately finding Isabella's tear-stained face. Isabella looked at him with desperate hope, silently pleading for him to defend her, to stand up to his mother, to choose their love over family pressure. "Alexander, darling," Victoria said smoothly, "I was just handling a staff issue. Isabella has been terminated for inappropriate behavior." Alexander stood frozen, caught between the woman he loved and the mother who had controlled his life since birth, the weight of social expectations and family loyalty crushing down on him like a physical force. The moment that would haunt Alexander for the rest of his life was when he looked into Isabella's eyes and said, "Nothing." The social pressure, his mother's intimidating presence, the weight of everything he'd been taught about class and propriety, it all paralyzed him when he should have been strongest. Isabella watched the man she loved stand there in silence, while his mother destroyed her life and reputation. "Alexander," she whispered, one final plea for him to fight for their love. But when he remained silent, looking away from her desperate gaze, something died in Isabella's heart forever. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice breaking with the weight of betrayal. As she walked toward the door with what little dignity she had left, she whispered, "I thought you were different. I thought our love meant something to you." Alexander's failure to defend her was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything Victoria could have said or done. 3 months after leaving Beverly Hills, Isabella found herself back in the small village outside Guadalajara, where she'd grown up, carrying the same battered suitcase and a heart shattered beyond repair. The contrast between this humble place and the opulent Whitman mansion couldn't have been more stark. Dirt roads instead of marble floors, simple adobe houses instead of crystal chandeliers. "Mija, what happened?" her elderly neighbor Senora Garcia asked with concern. "I thought you were working for rich people in America." Isabella could only shake her head, unable to find words to explain how completely her American dream had collapsed. She had returned home, not in triumph as she'd planned, but in defeat, carrying the weight of a love that had destroyed everything she thought she knew about herself. The sight of her mother's dramatically deteriorated condition hit Isabella like a physical blow to her already broken heart. Maria had grown significantly weaker during her daughter's absence in America, the diabetes taking an increasingly devastating toll on her frail body. "Mama, you look so thin," Isabella whispered, trying to hide her shock as she helped her mother with her insulin injection. Maria's hands shook more than before. Her breathing was labored, and Isabella realized with growing horror that the time she'd spent in Beverly Hills chasing impossible dreams might have cost her precious months with the person who mattered most. "I'm home now, Mama," Isabella promised, tears streaming down her face. "I'm never leaving you again." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Beverly Hills, Alexander was drowning in a depression so deep that he barely resembled the confident heir he'd once been. He hadn't shaved in weeks, barely ate, and spent his days staring out the window at the garden where he and Isabella had shared their first kiss. His business associates noticed his complete lack of focus during meetings, his inability to make even simple decisions, his transformation from a sharp businessman to a broken shell of a man. The mansion felt like a tomb without Isabella's warmth and laughter echoing through its halls. Every room held memories that tortured him. The kitchen where she taught him to cook, the library where they'd shared poetry, the conservatory where they'd fallen in love. Victoria's solution to her son's lovesick behavior was to parade a steady stream of appropriate young women through the mansion, each one a perfect example of breeding, wealth, and social standing. "Alexander, I've invited the Hendersons' daughter Charlotte for dinner tonight," Victoria would announce. "She's just returned from studying in Paris and would make an excellent wife." But Alexander would barely acknowledge these carefully selected heiresses, responding to their attempts at conversation with monosyllables and obvious disinterest. "This is Patricia Whitmore," Victoria would say, introducing another candidate. "Her family owns the largest shipping company on the West Coast." Alexander's response was always the same, polite but cold indifference that made it clear his heart was somewhere else entirely. Victoria's patience with Alexander's rejection of every suitable woman she presented finally reached its breaking point. "You've turned down 7 perfectly acceptable young ladies, Alexander," she shouted during a heated confrontation in the study. "Charlotte Henderson has a trust fund worth $50 million. Patricia Whitmore could merge our shipping interests with theirs. What more could you possibly want?" Alexander's response was explosive in its intensity. "I want Isabella. I want the woman you drove away with your cruelty and prejudice. These vapid socialites bore me to tears. They have no substance, no passion, no soul. They're everything that Isabella isn't: shallow, materialistic, and completely artificial." Victoria was shocked by the venom in his voice, realizing for the first time that her son's feelings went far deeper than a simple infatuation. 6 months after returning to Mexico, Isabella achieved the dream that had sustained her through her darkest moments in Beverly Hills. She graduated from nursing school. The ceremony was simple, held outdoors in the courtyard of the small medical college. But Isabella's pride was immense as she received her diploma. Her mother, despite her weakened condition, insisted on attending to watch her daughter's triumph. "I'm so proud of you, Mija," Maria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You did it. You became a healer, just like you always dreamed." But even in her moment of victory, Isabella couldn't shake the memory of Alexander's voice saying he was proud of her dreams. The accomplishment felt hollow without the person she'd wanted most to share it with. As a qualified nurse, Isabella threw herself completely into her work at the village medical clinic, becoming an angel of mercy to the poor families who had never had access to proper medical care before. Her training in America, combined with her natural compassion and understanding of their struggles, made her an invaluable asset to the community. "Infirmera Isabella saved my baby's life," grateful mothers would say. "She's a gift from God to our village." But those who looked closely could see that despite her dedication and skill, there was a permanent sadness in Isabella's eyes that never quite went away. She had found purpose in serving others, but the wound in her heart remained as deep as ever. 8 months after Isabella's departure, Alexander finally experienced a moment of brutal self-awareness that would change everything. Sitting alone in the library where they'd shared so many intimate conversations, he finally understood the magnitude of his betrayal and cowardice. "I failed her when she needed me most," he realized aloud, the words hitting him like a physical blow. "I stood there like a coward and watched Mother humiliate the woman I love, and I said nothing. I chose social convention over the most beautiful love I'll ever know." The realization that his silence had been the ultimate betrayal, worse than anything Victoria could have said or done, brought Alexander to his knees with grief and determination. He had lost Isabella because of his own weakness, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fight for her. Alexander's decision to go after Isabella sent Victoria into a panic that revealed just how desperate she'd become to control her son's life. "You cannot go to Mexico chasing after that girl," Victoria shouted as Alexander packed his suitcase. "Think about what you're throwing away: your position in society, your business responsibilities, your entire future." But Alexander had finally found the courage that had failed him months earlier. "I'm not throwing away my future, Mother. I'm trying to get it back. Isabella was my future, and I was too much of a coward to fight for her when it mattered." As he walked toward the door, Victoria made one last desperate attempt to stop him. "She won't want you, Alexander. You hurt her too deeply. You betrayed her when she needed you most." Alexander paused, pain flashing across his face, but his resolve didn't waver. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn her forgiveness." When Alexander finally tracked Isabella down to her village and appeared at her family's humble home, the reunion he dreamed of became his worst nightmare. Isabella stood in the doorway, her face a mask of controlled pain as she faced the man who had broken her heart so completely. "Please, Isabella, just give me 5 minutes to explain," Alexander begged, but Isabella's response was firm and final. "There's nothing to explain, Alexander. I saw everything I needed to see that day in your mother's foyer. You made your choice when you stood there in silence while she destroyed me." Her voice was steady, but Alexander could see the deep hurt still burning in her eyes. "I love you with everything I had, and you abandoned me when I needed you most. That's not the kind of love I can trust again. Please leave and don't come back." As she closed the door in his face, Alexander realized that some betrayals cut too deep to heal, and that he might have lost the love of his life forever. 2 years had passed since Alexander's devastating rejection in Mexico, and life had settled into a painful routine of regret and loneliness when fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Victoria Whitman, the Iron Lady who had controlled every aspect of her family's life with ruthless precision, was getting dressed for a charity gala when she felt a crushing pain explode across her chest like lightning. "Alexander," she called out weakly as she collapsed on her bed, her face gray with the unmistakable signs of a massive heart attack. The woman who had destroyed so many lives with her cruelty was now facing her own mortality, and in that terrifying moment, she realized that all her wealth and power meant nothing if she died alone and unforgiven. Alexander found his mother barely conscious and immediately called 911. But as the paramedics worked to stabilize her, the lead EMT delivered news that made Alexander's blood run cold. "Her condition is extremely critical, sir. We need to get her to Cedars-Sinai immediately, but I have to be honest, her heart has sustained massive damage. She needs the best cardiac care available if she's going to have any chance of survival." As they rushed Victoria to the ambulance, Alexander felt a terror he'd never experienced before. Despite everything his mother had done, despite the pain she'd caused, the thought of losing her made him realize how much he still loved her and how desperately he wanted the chance to heal the wounds between them before it was too late. At the hospital, Dr. James Harrison's face was grave as he explained Victoria's condition to Alexander in terms that made the severity crystal clear. "Alexander, your mother's heart attack was massive. We've managed to stabilize her for now, but her condition is touch and go. The next 48 hours are critical." Alexander felt the floor falling away beneath him as the reality of possibly losing his mother hit him with unexpected force. "What can we do? Money is no object. Get the best specialists, the most advanced equipment, anything she needs." Dr. Harrison shook his head sadly. "This isn't about money, Alexander. At this point, she needs something that all the wealth in the world can't buy. She needs a miracle, and she needs specialized cardiac care that, frankly, most of our nurses aren't trained to provide." As Alexander sat beside his mother's hospital bed, watching the machines that were keeping her alive, Victoria struggled to open her eyes and speak. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, so sorry for what I did to you and that girl. I was so afraid of losing you that I destroyed the one thing that made you truly happy." Tears streamed down Alexander's face as he held his mother's frail hand. "Don't talk, Mother. Just focus on getting better. We can work through everything else later." But Victoria shook her head weakly. "No, I need to say this while I still can. Isabella, she was good for you. She made you a better man than I ever did. I was wrong, so terribly wrong." Dr. Harrison's suggestion that they needed a specialized cardiac nurse with advanced training sparked a desperate idea in Alexander's mind. As he paced the hospital corridor, he began making frantic phone calls to contacts in Mexico, trying to track down Isabella's current location and circumstances. "I need to find Isabella Martinez," he told everyone he could reach. "She's a registered nurse, probably working in the Guadalajara area. It's a matter of life and death." After hours of dead ends and false leads, he finally reached someone at the village clinic where Isabella worked. "See, she's here, but she's very busy with patients. Who wants to know?" The question that had seemed impossible for 2 years suddenly had an answer, and Alexander felt his heart racing with hope and terror in equal measure. Isabella was in the middle of treating a child with pneumonia when the clinic's old telephone rang with the call that would turn her world upside down once again. "Isabella Martinez? This is Alexander Whitman calling from Los Angeles. Please don't hang up. This is an emergency." Isabella's hands began to tremble as she heard the voice she'd tried so hard to forget. "Alexander, I told you never to contact me again," she said, her voice carefully controlled despite the chaos in her heart. "My mother is dying, Isabella. She's had a massive heart attack, and the doctors say she needs specialized cardiac nursing care. I know I have no right to ask this of you after everything that happened, but you're the best nurse I know, and we need you. Please." Isabella sat in her small kitchen, staring at the phone after Alexander's desperate plea, her heart torn between the professional duty she'd sworn to uphold and the personal pain that still burned like an open wound. Her mother, despite her own failing health, offered the wisdom that only comes from a lifetime of loving unconditionally. "Mija, you became a nurse to help people, not to judge whether they deserve your help," Maria said gently. "That woman may have hurt you, but she's also a mother who's dying, and her son is suffering. This isn't about Alexander or what happened between you. This is about who you are in your heart." Isabella knew her mother was right, but the thought of facing Alexander again, of walking back into that world that had destroyed her so completely, filled her with dread. 24 hours later, Isabella found herself boarding a plane to Los Angeles, carrying her nursing supplies and a heart full of conflicting emotions. She had agreed to come not for Alexander, not even for Victoria, but because her oath as a nurse demanded that she put human life above personal grievances. "I'm doing this because it's my job to save lives," she told herself as the plane lifted off from Guadalajara. "I'm doing this because someone is dying and I have the skills to help. This has nothing to do with love or forgiveness or second chances." But even as she repeated these words like a mantra, Isabella couldn't ignore the fact that she was flying toward the man who had broken her heart and the woman who had destroyed her dreams, not knowing if she was strong enough to face them both again. When Isabella walked into the hospital's cardiac intensive care unit wearing her crisp nurse's uniform, Alexander felt his knees nearly give way at the sight of the woman he'd never stopped loving. She looked older, more mature, with a quiet confidence that spoke of the professional she'd become, but her eyes still held the warmth and compassion that had first captured his heart. "Thank you for coming," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I know what this must cost you." Isabella's response was purely professional, her voice steady and controlled. "I'm here for your mother, Alexander. Show me her chart and let me assess her condition. We don't have time for personal conversations right now." But despite her clinical demeanor, Alexander could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided his gaze, signs that she wasn't as unaffected by their reunion as she pretended to be. As Isabella took over Victoria's cardiac care with the skill and precision of a true professional, the dying woman's eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been shame. Here was the young woman she had humiliated and driven away, now working around the clock to save the life of the person who had destroyed her happiness. "Why?" Victoria whispered during one of her lucid moments. "Why are you helping me after what I did to you?" Isabella's answer revealed the depth of character that Alexander had fallen in love with years earlier. "Because you're a human being in need of medical care, Mrs. Whitman. Because saving lives is what I swore to do, regardless of personal feelings. And because your son loves you, even if you made terrible mistakes." As Isabella monitored Victoria's heart rhythm and adjusted her medications with expert precision, both Alexander and his mother began to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary: grace in action, love conquering hatred, and the kind of forgiveness that could heal even the deepest wounds. During the long days of Victoria's recovery, something profound began to shift in the heart of the woman who had once been so full of pride and prejudice. As she watched Isabella work tirelessly around the clock, checking monitors, adjusting medications, and providing compassionate care despite their painful history, Victoria began to see what Alexander had fallen in love with years earlier. Here was a woman who possessed something that no amount of money or breeding could buy: genuine character, selfless dedication, and a heart capable of loving even those who had wronged her. "She could have let me die," Victoria realized with growing wonder. "After everything I did to her, she could have simply refused to come, and no one would have blamed her. But she came anyway." As Isabella gently helped Victoria sit up to take her medication, the proud matriarch found herself studying this young woman with new eyes, seeing past the prejudices that had once blinded her completely. "You know, I spent my entire life believing that breeding and social status were the most important qualities a person could possess," Victoria said quietly. "I judged people by their bank accounts and their family names, thinking that was what truly mattered in this world." Isabella continued her work professionally, not responding to Victoria's musings, but Victoria pressed on. "But watching you these past few days, seeing how you care for people regardless of how they've treated you, I'm beginning to understand that I was wrong about everything that really matters in life." From the hallway, Alexander watched in amazement as Isabella interacted with other patients and their families, bringing comfort and healing wherever she went. A frightened child would stop crying when she spoke to him in gentle Spanish. An elderly man's face would light up when she took time to listen to his concerns. Worried family members would find peace in her calm, professional reassurance. "This is who she really is," Alexander realized with profound admiration. "This is the woman I fell in love with, someone who makes the world better just by being in it." and I was fool enough to let my mother's prejudices make me believe she wasn't worthy of our family name. Watching Isabella in her element, Alexander understood that she had always been too good for them, not the other way around. The moment that would change Victoria forever came when she witnessed Isabella comforting a poor Mexican family whose grandmother was dying in the room next door. Isabella spoke to them in Spanish, held their hands, and helped them understand the medical procedures, all on her own time, after working a 12-hour shift caring for Victoria. She's just like them, Victoria thought, and for the first time, that observation filled her with admiration rather than disdain. She understands their pain because she's lived it. She can comfort them because she knows what it's like to be afraid and powerless in a world that doesn't seem to care about people like them. And instead of that making her bitter or angry, it made her more compassionate, more determined to help others. Victoria's attempt to engage Isabella in personal conversation was met with polite but firm boundaries that impressed her even more. "Isabella, I want you to know that I'm beginning to see how wrong I was about you," Victoria said during one of their quiet moments. Isabella continued adjusting the foredrip, her voice professional but not unkind. "Mrs. Whitman, my job is to help you recover, not to discuss the past. What matters now is your health and getting you strong enough to go home to your family." Victoria was struck by Isabella's grace and dignity. There was no gloating, no attempt to make Victoria grovel, just pure professionalism and compassion. She could make me beg for forgiveness, Victoria thought with growing respect, but she's too classy for that. She's taking the high road, even when she has every right to be bitter. What really opened Victoria's eyes was watching the subtle interactions between Isabella and Alexander during the brief moments when they had to coordinate about her care. Despite Isabella's professional demeanor and obvious efforts to keep things strictly medical, Victoria could see the love that still existed between them. The way Alexander's voice softened when he spoke to her, the way Isabella's hands would tremble slightly when he was near, the careful way they avoided looking directly at each other for too long. They're still in love, Victoria realized with a mixture of sadness and hope. After everything I did to destroy their relationship, after all the pain and separation, they're still deeply in love with each other. And I'm the one who broke something that beautiful. On her 5th day of recovery, Victoria finally found the courage to speak the words that had been weighing on her heart. "Isabella, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me," Victoria said with a strength that surprised them both. "I was wrong about you. Not just a little wrong, but completely devastatingly wrong in every possible way." Isabella paused in her work, clearly surprised by Victoria's tone. "You were never a gold digger or an opportunist. You were exactly what Alexander said you were, a woman of extraordinary character who loved my son for who he truly was, not what he could provide. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too proud and prejudiced to see the truth." Victoria's voice broke with emotion. "I judged you by your circumstances instead of your character, and in doing so, I revealed how little character I had myself." As Victoria continued her emotional confession, she finally put into words what she'd been learning during her recovery. "Do you know what I see when I look at you now, Isabella? I see the daughter I never had, but always wished for. I see a woman who possesses everything I thought I valued: strength, grace, dignity, compassion. But she earned these qualities through struggle and sacrifice, not through privilege and wealth." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she spoke. "My son didn't fall beneath his station when he fell in love with you. He reached higher than he'd ever reached before. You didn't need our family name to make you worthy. We needed your character to make us worthy of you." It was a complete reversal of everything Victoria had believed about social hierarchy and human worth. Victoria's formal apology came with the kind of humility she'd never shown to anyone in her entire privileged life. "Isabella, I'm asking for your forgiveness, though I know I don't deserve it. I humiliated you publicly, destroyed your relationship with my son, and tried to crush your dreams because I was threatened by your goodness. I was wrong about everything, about you, about love, about what really matters in this world." Victoria paused, her voice trembling with emotion. "But more than that, I want you to know that if I could undo what I did, if I could give you back those 2 years of happiness I stole from you and Alexander, I would do it in a heartbeat. You're not just good enough for my son. You're too good for our entire family. And we're the ones who should be grateful that someone like you could love someone like him. Isabella's response to Victoria's heartfelt apology revealed the depth of character that had originally captured Alexander's heart and now won over even his prejudiced mother. Mrs. Whitman, I forgave you a long time ago, Isabella said gently, her voice filled with a peace that spoke of genuine healing. Carrying anger and resentment would have poisoned my heart and made me unable to do the work I love. I became a nurse to heal people, and that healing had to start with myself. Victoria stared at this remarkable young woman with growing awe and respect. But what I want you to understand, Isabella continued, is that love isn't something we do for what we can get in return. I loved Alexander not because of his wealth or status, but because of his kindness, his intelligence, his capacity for growth. And despite everything that happened between us, I want you to know that he's a good man who deserves happiness. In that moment, Victoria fully understood why her son had never been able to forget this extraordinary woman, and she knew with absolute certainty that Isabella Martinez was exactly the daughter-in-law she should have welcomed with open arms from the very beginning. The moment that Alexander had been building up courage for finally arrived when he found Isabella alone in his mother's hospital room during one of her recovery periods. Isabella, I need to tell you everything that's been in my heart for the past 2 years, Alexander began, his voice trembling with emotion. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after what I did, or rather, what I failed to do when you needed me most. But I can't let you leave again without you knowing the truth about how much I love you and how deeply I regret the cowardice that cost us everything. Isabella tried to maintain her professional demeanor, but Alexander could see the pain and longing in her eyes. That day in the foyer when my mother was destroying you, I should have swept you up in my arms and walked out with you. I should have chosen you over everything else, because you were worth more than all of it combined. Alexander's words poured out like water from a broken dam, carrying 2 years of accumulated pain and longing. Do you want to know what the worst part has been, Isabella? It's not the loneliness or the emptiness or even the regret. It's knowing that I had the most beautiful love in the world in my hands, and I let social pressure and cowardice make me drop it. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too weak to fight for you when it mattered most. Isabella remained silent, but Alexander could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. Every day for 2 years, I've woken up thinking about you. Every successful business deal, every social event, every moment that should have been a victory felt hollow because the one person whose pride and love would have made it meaningful wasn't there to share it with me. I realized that without you, success means nothing. Isabella's response came slowly, each word carefully chosen, but carrying the weight of years of heartbreak. Alexander, do you understand what that day did to me? It wasn't just the humiliation or even losing my job. It was discovering that the man I loved, the man I thought would stand by me through anything, could be paralyzed by social expectations when I needed him most. Her voice broke slightly as she continued. I went home to Mexico believing that everything we shared had been an illusion, that when faced with real consequences, your love for me wasn't strong enough to overcome your fear of what other people would think. That kind of betrayal doesn't just break your heart. It makes you question your own judgment, your own worth, your ability to recognize real love when you see it. As their conversation deepened, both Alexander and Isabella began to reveal how the pain of their separation had changed them in fundamental ways. I'm not the same naive housekeeper you fell in love with, Alexander, Isabella said with quiet strength. These 2 years have taught me that I don't need anyone's validation to know my own worth. I've saved lives, helped families, and built a career that gives me purpose and fulfillment. I learned that I can be complete on my own. Alexander nodded with deep respect. And I'm not the same coward who failed you that day, Isabella. Losing you taught me that love isn't just about feeling. It's about choosing, fighting, standing up for what matters most even when the cost is everything you thought you wanted. I learned too late that you were more valuable than everything else in my life combined. Just as Alexander and Isabella's conversation reached its most vulnerable point, Victoria appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but with determination. "Don't stop talking because of me," she said gently, settling into a chair with obvious effort. "I need to hear this conversation, and more importantly, I need to be part of it." Both Alexander and Isabella looked surprised by Victoria's presence, but she pressed on with a strength that belied her recent medical crisis. "I've spent the last week watching both of you try to pretend that the love you share doesn't still exist. And frankly, I can't bear to watch this tragedy continue when I'm the one who caused it in the first place. It's time for me to do something right for once in my life." What Victoria said next would forever change the dynamic between all three of them. "Isabella Martinez, I want to publicly acknowledge what I should have recognized from the very beginning. You are exactly the woman my son needs, deserves, and should have married 2 years ago." Victoria's voice grew stronger as she continued. "You have more class, character, and genuine nobility in your little finger than I've managed to develop in 58 years of privileged living. Alexander didn't fall beneath his station when he fell in love with you. He reached higher than he'd ever reached before. I was too blind with prejudice to see it." She turned to her son with tears in her eyes. "And Alexander, if you let this remarkable woman walk out of your life again because you're afraid of what society might think, then you're a bigger fool than I raised you to be." Victoria's next words would heal wounds that had festered for years and create the family bond that should have existed from the beginning. "Isabella, I want to ask you something, and I need you to know that I'm asking not just as Alexander's mother, but as someone who has come to love and respect you for who you truly are." Victoria paused, gathering her strength for what might be the most important words she'd ever speak. "Will you please consider giving my son and me a second chance? Will you let us be the family we should have been from the start? I promise you that if you choose to love my son again, you'll never face the kind of opposition from me that drove you away before. Instead, you'll have my complete support, my admiration, and my love as the daughter I never had but always needed." Later that evening, in the quiet chapel of the hospital where they'd fought to save Victoria's life, Alexander asked Isabella the question that had been in his heart for 2 years. "Isabella Martinez, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway because I love you more than life itself." He dropped to one knee, producing a simple but beautiful ring. "I'm not asking you to marry the Whitman fortune or join the Whitman social circle. I'm asking you to marry me, Alexander, the man who has learned that without you, all the wealth and status in the world means nothing. Will you be my wife? Not because of what I can give you, but because of who we become when we're together." Through tears of joy, Isabella whispered the yes that would finally unite two hearts that had been meant for each other from the very beginning. Their wedding 6 months later was a celebration that perfectly represented the love that had brought them together, a beautiful blend of two cultures, two families, and two hearts that had overcome every obstacle to find their way back to each other. Isabella's mother, now stabilized on new medication that Alexander had quietly arranged, sat in the front row next to Victoria, the two mothers united in their love for the couple. The church was filled with an extraordinary mix of Beverly Hills socialites and Mexican villagers, wealthy business associates, and humble patients Isabella had treated, all brought together to celebrate a love that had proven stronger than prejudice, separation, and heartbreak. Pastor Michael Torres, who had counseled Isabella through her darkest hours, performed the ceremony with words about forgiveness, second chances, and the power of love to transform even the hardest hearts. As Alexander and Isabella danced to their first song as husband and wife, surrounded by family and friend from both their worlds, Victoria watched with tears of joy and profound gratitude for the lesson in love and acceptance that Isabella had taught them all. The reception was held not in some exclusive Beverly Hills ballroom, but in the community center of Isabella's village, where the celebration continued long into the night with traditional Mexican music, American jazz, and the laughter of people who had learned that love recognizes no boundaries of class, culture, or circumstance. 1 year later, as Alexander and Isabella welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Esperanza, meaning hope, Victoria held her granddaughter and marveled at how this tiny person represented everything beautiful about second chances, forgiveness, and love that conquers all. The fairy tale that had seemed impossible had become reality, proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that must be broken before they can be made whole, and that true love really can overcome every obstacle when two hearts are brave enough to fight for each other against all odds.